Sarah was just an ordinary college student, visiting her family's old house in a quiet Texas town for the weekend. The kind of town where everyone knows each other, and the streets grow still by nightfall. She wasn't looking for trouble, just a peaceful break from campus life. But this town had a secret, whispered quietly between neighbors, passed down like a shadow behind every smile. Stories about that house, stories Sarah never paid much attention to until now. The neighborhood was calm, almost too calm, with tall oaks casting long fingers of shadow across cracked sidewalks. As dusk settled, the fading sunlight dipped behind the distant hills, and the sounds of daytime, birds, laughter, barking dogs, faded away. The house Sarah stayed in was one her family had owned for decades. It was large, with old wooden floors and windows that rattled slightly in the wind. But there was one part of that house everyone talked about in low voices, a narrow hallway on the second floor. Family members avoided it after dark. No one spoke openly about why, but everyone knew not to go there. Sarah had always been skeptical, but now that she was alone, the house felt different. The walls seemed to listen. The air felt colder, heavier. At first, it was small things. The soft creak of floorboards behind her when she was sure she'd been alone. The faintest whisper, just beyond hearing, like the house was trying to tell her something. Every time she glanced toward that hallway, she caught a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping just beyond the edge of the light. Her heart quickened, but she told herself it was only her imagination. Still, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At night, when the world outside went silent, the house came alive in strange ways. Footsteps echoed softly, slow and deliberate, pacing just beyond the door. A whisper floated through the darkness, too soft to understand, but impossible to ignore. Sarah tried to stay calm, but every sound sent a chill crawling up her spine. It was as if the house held a breath, waiting for something to happen, something she wasn't prepared for. As the night deepened, Sarah's unease grew into something sharper, something she couldn't ignore. The soft whispers turned into quiet breaths in the darkness, the kind that brush against your skin but leave no one there. From her spot in the living room, she glanced toward the old hallway once again. That long stretch of worn wood, lined by faded wallpaper and dim, yellowing light. And there, at the very end, something moved. It was never fully clear, just a shape, a dark blur, always shifting, always just beyond the glow of the lamp. A shadowy figure, standing still but impossible to focus on. When Sarah blinked, it would shift, vanish, only to reappear moments later, always in the same spot, watching, waiting. The presence wasn't angry or loud. It was patient and cold, like it was biding its time, studying her. The air around her thickened. Suddenly, the soft hum of electricity faltered, and the lights flickered, throwing the entire room into darkness for a heartbeat. When the bulbs sputtered back to life, the feeling in the house shifted. The phone line, her only link to the outside world, went dead. A harsh silence filled the space where the comforting sound of a dialed tone once lived. She was cut off, alone. Then the house started moving on its own. The small things at first, a picture frame tilted slowly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Then the slam of a door, sharp, loud, echoing down the hallway. Sarah jumped, breath catching in her throat. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a warning drum. Every creak, every groan of the old house felt like a message. More doors slammed. Drawers slid open, spilling their contents across the floor. A cold breeze swept through rooms with closed windows. It was as if the house itself was waking up, alive with a presence that didn't want her there. Fear wrapped around Sarah like a tightening knot. She wanted to scream but found no sound. She wanted to run but felt rooted to the spot. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, but the shadow waited patiently at the end of the hallway. Unmoving, watching, its shape barely visible in the dim light. Sarah knew then that whatever was there wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't going anywhere. The weight in the air grew heavier, pressing down on Sarah's chest like an unseen hand. The shadow at the end of the hallway hadn't moved, but the darkness around it seemed to thicken, swallowing the light, turning the narrow passage into an endless void. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she fought the urge to turn and flee. Instead, she found herself moving forward, step by careful step, toward the figure. The wooden floor groaned beneath her feet, each creak echoing loudly in the stillness. Every nerve screamed in protest, but Sarah's eyes stayed locked on that shifting silhouette. The closer she got, the colder the air became. It was as if the warmth from the rest of the house was being drained away, leaving her skin numb and her heart racing. Then, just as she reached the edge of the hallway's light, the power flickered again. and everything went black. The sudden silence was deafening. Sarah's heart thundered in her ears. For a long moment, there was nothing but darkness, until a soft, breathy whisper broke through, barely audible but unmistakably calling her name. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The whisper slid along the walls, creeping closer, wrapping around her like a cold mist. Then, without warning, a hand, cold and heavy like ice, shot out from the blackness and grabbed her wrist. Sarah's scream caught in her throat as a rush of panic flooded her body. She tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, unyielding and urgent. The shadow that had been still moments before suddenly surged forward, its shape more defined now, not quite human, yet unmistakably reaching out. The lights flickered back, and Sarah found herself alone in the hallway. Her wrist tingled from where the hand had held her, but there was no sign of the shadow. Only the faintest trace of cold lingered, like a warning left behind. For a moment, she stood frozen, heart pounding, mind racing. Whatever had reached for her wasn't gone, it was waiting. Waiting for the next time the lights faded, the next moment she felt safe. The shadow wasn't just a glimpse in the dark. It was a presence, and it had made contact. Morning light spilled weakly through the curtains, but the house still felt cold, colder than it should have after a restless night. Sarah sat quietly in the kitchen, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The terror of what had happened only grew clearer as the adrenaline faded. She wasn't sure if she'd dreamed the touch on her wrist or if it was real, but the lingering chill in the air said otherwise. Her fingers brushed over the old hallway once again, now filled with daylight, but still heavy with silence. That part of the house seemed untouched by the sun's warmth. She noticed a pile of newspapers folded neatly on the floor, something she hadn't seen the night before. Curious, she unfolded the yellowed pages and scanned the headlines. One story caught her eye, a report from decades ago about a young boy who had gone missing in that very house. The details were sparse, but the child's name was unmistakable. It was the same name Sarah had heard whispered so clearly in the dark. The article mentioned how the boy was last seen near the hallway, the very place her family had always warned her to avoid. Questions flooded her mind. Why had no one ever told her about this? Why had the hallway always been off limits? And most importantly, what had been waiting there all those years, still reaching out? The house held its secrets tightly, and Sarah knew she wasn't the first to feel the presence lurking in the shadows. As she left that day, the hallway remained shrouded in silence, the shadow never fully fading, a dark echo of a past long forgotten but never truly gone. Sometimes, the things we don't see are the most real of all, and some shadows never leave, no matter how brightly the light tries to chase them away. James had always felt a strange connection to his grandmother's old plantation house, nestled deep in the Louisiana bayou. The kind of place where the fog rolls in thick and heavy, wrapping the tall cypress trees like ghostly veils. It was the kind of house where time seemed to slow, where the air smelled of damp earth and forgotten memories. James was home alone one weekend while his family was away, looking forward to a quiet evening. But the silence he found wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. The porch, wide and creaking, stretched across the front of the house. It had a reputation, whispered stories passed down through generations about spirits that lingered there, watching over the land. Locals said you could sometimes see figures standing just beyond the trees, silent and still, as if guarding secrets no one dared uncover. James had never seen anything himself, but the stories weighed on his mind that night. As darkness fell, the house seemed to hold its breath. The fog thickened, rolling in closer until the trees disappeared into a dense white haze. James settled in, trying to drown the uneasy feeling with music and the flicker of candlelight. But then the knocking started. Soft at first, barely more than a tap, coming from the porch. James froze, heart tightening. He checked outside. Nothing. The empty porch creaked gently in the breeze, but no footsteps, no shadow, no one. Yet the knocking continued, irregular but persistent, echoing faintly against the wooden walls. The house seemed to listen, and the night was far from over. James's eyes scanned the porch again, gripping the worn wood railing for support. Every time he looked, the space was empty. No figure, no movement, just the soft swaying of a hanging lantern. The knocking would stop, then start again, tapping out a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, like a message whispered through the shadows. Then the old doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence like a knife. James bolted to the security monitor, expecting to see a visitor or perhaps a prankster. But the camera showed only darkness, thick fog blurring every corner of the porch. No one stood there. No face. No movement. Unease settled deep in his chest. The temperature inside the hallway suddenly dropped, a cold spot spreading from the floorboards upward, wrapping around James like an unseen hand. His breath became visible in the frigid air, even though the thermostat hadn't changed. Every shadow seemed to lengthen unnaturally, twisting with the flicker of candle flames. The walls echoed with faint sounds, footsteps pacing softly, the creak of rocking chairs that stood still, whispers too low to understand but close enough to chill the bones. James felt eyes on him, unseen but unrelenting. He wasn't alone. Something had crossed the threshold, passing through the fog, slipping past the empty porch. Something waiting just beyond the light. Heart pounding and hands trembling, James reached for his phone and dialed his grandmother's number, desperation thick in his voice. The line crackled to life, and her steady, warning tone cut through the dark quiet. "James," she said firmly, "if anyone knocks at that door tonight, no matter what, don't open it. Some things you can't see, but they can see you. Just stay inside. Don't answer." The words hung in the air like a lifeline, but also a chilling promise. James barely had time to respond before the knocking returned, louder now, more urgent, like a desperate plea or a threat. It wasn't just knocking anymore. Low, guttural moans began to seep from the edges of the porch, blending with the sound of wind through the trees, but with a hollow, unnatural quality that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He moved toward the window, trying to peer through the fog glass into the swirling night beyond the porch light. And then, just as the moans grew louder, a figure materialized. A shadow pressed against the glass. Not a shape you could fully see, but a vague outline, with a face that seemed distorted, warped by darkness and desperation. The figure's breath fogged the window, and the eyes, barely visible, were fixed directly on James, unblinking and empty. The face lingered there for long moments, silent except for the rising moans that filled the porch and seeped into the house like cold water. James felt a cold sweat break across his skin. Every instinct screamed at him to back away, to lock every door and never look again. But the face stayed unyielding. It was a presence from another time, or maybe another place, something that didn't belong in the warm safety of his grandmother's home. It was watching, waiting, reaching silently through the glass, reminding James that some doors are meant to stay closed. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains, softening the edges of the night's terror, but doing little to ease the chill that still clung to the old plantation house. James, bleary-eyed and restless, stepped outside onto the porch to clear his head, hoping the fresh air would wash away the weight pressing on his chest. What he found stopped him cold. Across the weathered wooden floorboards, muddy footprints trailed away from the porch, leading down the steps and disappearing into the fog that still clung stubbornly to the ground. What made James's blood run cold wasn't just the footprints themselves, but the fact that the door to the house had never opened. No creak, no sound, nothing to suggest anyone had crossed the threshold. His mind raced, trying to explain what he'd seen the night before. The face pressed against the glass, the knocking that echoed through the darkness. Confused and shaken, James called his grandmother once more, hoping she might offer some kind of comfort or explanation. Her voice was heavy with old stories, as she shared the legend passed down through generations. A restless spirit trapped between worlds, bound to the house but unable to enter fully. The porch, she explained, was the thin veil where this spirit lingered, forever trying to cross over, reaching out to the living through the fragile barrier of wood and glass. She warned that the spirit often took the form of someone familiar, someone from the family's past, to tempt those inside to open the door. James's breath caught as a memory surfaced, the face on the porch. It wasn't just any shadowy figure. It bore an eerie resemblance to a long-dead relative, a man whose story had faded from family conversations, but whose presence was etched deeply into the house's history. In that moment, James understood. The figure wasn't a stranger at all. It was a ghost bound by pain, trapped in a cycle of longing and loss. And it wasn't done trying to cross through. The house held its secrets tightly, but some stories refused to be forgotten, and some spirits refused to rest. Emily had spent countless summers at her family's old farmhouse nestled in rural Michigan. The kind of place where the wind whistles through cracked window panes and the trees cast long, twisted shadows across the lawn as the sun dips below the horizon. This night, however, she was alone, tasked with babysitting her younger brother while her parents were away, a responsibility that felt heavier than usual in the empty house. The farmhouse was full of history, its walls steeped in stories and memories that seemed to seep into the very air. One rule stood above all others: the basement was strictly off-limits. Her parents never explained why, only that it was dangerous and that Emily was never to go down there, no matter what she heard or saw. It was a rule Emily obeyed, but tonight, the old house felt different, restless, watching. As the evening wore on and the sun disappeared behind the trees, strange noises began to echo from below. At first, just faint scratches and soft thuds, easily dismissed as the house settling or the wind shifting. But soon, the sounds grew more deliberate, like whispers curling up the basement stairs, teasing the edges of her hearing. Emily tried to focus on the television, to drown out the unease growing in her chest. But the noises wouldn't stop. They seemed to beckon, soft and urgent, calling from the darkness beneath the house. Every now and then, a cold draft would seep through the floorboards, brushing against her skin like an unseen breath. The basement door remained closed, heavy and forbidding. And yet, something was down there, something alive in the shadows, waiting. As the night deepened, the noises from below grew harder to ignore. At first, it was just soft whispers, faint, almost like distant voices carried on a breeze, curling around the closed basement door. Emily's ears strained to catch words, but the sounds slipped away just as she focused. Beneath those whispers came something else, faint scratching noises, as if something was clawing at the wood, trying to find a way out. She told herself it was the house settling, or maybe the wind sneaking through cracks. But the noises didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. Scratches became scrapes, whispers became murmurs that echoed along the hallway. The basement door, sturdy and locked tight, seemed to vibrate under the pressure of whatever was behind it, as though the shadows themselves were pressing forward, eager to be seen. Emily's heart thudded in her chest. She forced herself to stay calm, focusing on her brother's soft breathing from the other room. But every time she glanced toward that basement door, the sense of dread wrapped tighter around her. The air grew colder. Her skin prickled with the feeling of unseen eyes watching from the darkness. Then the lights flickered, a sharp, violent stutter of electricity that plunged the house into momentary blackness. The familiar glow of the lamps died, leaving only shadows to fill the room. When the lights returned, they did so with a sickly yellow hue, casting strange angles and deepening the darkness around the basement door. Power outages followed in quick succession, each one longer and more unsettling than the last. In the brief flickers of light, Emily thought she saw shapes moving just beyond the edge of her vision. The whispers climbed higher, blending with low, unsteady moans that seemed to seep up from the earth itself. It was clear, something was stirring below, something that didn't want to stay hidden. The basement door, once solid and silent, now seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Faint creaks turning to groans, like the house itself was breathing in time with Emily's rising panic. The whispers spilled into words, unintelligible but desperate, growing louder and more frantic with every passing second. Unable to hold back, Emily's trembling hand reached toward the cold doorknob. The moment her fingers brushed the metal, a chill shot through her arm, as if icy fingers gripped her skin. The whispers turned into frantic pleading, a tangled jumble of voices, begging for release, begging for help. Her breath caught, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might burst free. She hesitated, then slowly, impossibly, she turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a darkness so deep it swallowed the weak beam of her flashlight. The basement stairs descended like a yawning mouth, shadows writhing just beyond the light. Then from the blackness, a cold hand, pale, thin, and trembling, reached up and grabbed Emily's ankle. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she stumbled backward, the weight of the touch burning into her skin. The whispers erupted into frantic voices now, screaming, crying, pleading, all tangled together in a rising tide of fear and sorrow. Emily scrambled away, heart racing, mind spinning. The basement held secrets, old, painful, and impossible to escape. The voices were trapped there, caught between worlds, desperate to be heard. And now they had found her. The night finally gave way to dawn, but the farmhouse remained heavy with a silence that felt thick and unnatural. Emily sat trembling in the kitchen, her mind racing to make sense of what had happened. The basement door stood slightly ajar, as if inviting the darkness back inside. When her parents returned, they noticed the unease clinging to the house. Slowly, they revealed the truth. The basement had once belonged to a tenant who disappeared without a trace decades ago. No one knew what had happened, but strange noises had long been reported, whispers and scratches heard by those brave enough to listen. Emily's experience was not unique. The voices she heard were echoes of those lost, trapped in a place between worlds, caught in the house's walls. The hand that grabbed her ankle wasn't just a touch. It was a plea for help from someone who never left. Days later, Emily could still feel the cold grip in her dreams, and sometimes, late at night, faint whispers would drift from the basement, reminding her, some things don't rest quietly, no matter how far you run. The farmhouse holds its secrets tightly, and some whispers are never meant to be answered. Which of these stories chilled you to the bone the most? Have you ever felt something strange while home alone? A sound, a shadow, a whisper that shouldn't be there? We want to hear your stories and thoughts. Drop them in the comments below and join the conversation. Remember, the night may be darkest just before the dawn, but some shadows never leave. If you want to uncover more terrifying tales that haunt the quiet places, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Darkness is waiting, and so are we.